Welcome to the Star Chamber. I'm Ryan Swayze, a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel and the founder and president of the Walk the Talk Foundation, a nonprofit that advocates for and advises currently serving and former military service members going through the arduous journey of administrative processes and investigations in our government.
And I am Francescagraham, a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel and the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Advisor for the Walk the Talk Foundation. For all our returning guests, welcome back. And for our new listeners, thank you for tuning in. Before we begin this week's topic, please do not forget to hit that subscribe button, check out our Walk the Talk Foundation website, and hit that donate button if you think we're doing a good job. Also, check out our newsletter, the DoD Times Redacted, on all the socials, including LinkedIn, X, Instagram, and Facebook. Links in the description. All right, Star Chamber listeners, let's get started. Welcome back, Star Chamber listeners, to another great episode of the Star Chamber. Dun,
All
dun,
right.
dun.
Yeah.
We are joined today by a fantastic guest, Miss Carolyn Rocco, Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Air Force. And before we get started, I would like to read the quick disclaimer, and then I will read her bio, and then I'll turn it over to Carolyn to cover a little bit more of what I missed in her bio, and then we'll get this show started. So, first of all, the opinions and views expressed by guests on this podcast are solely their own and do not represent the official policies, positions, or endorsements of the United States Air Force or any other government entity. This discussion is intended for informational purposes only and should not be construed as reflecting the official stance of any military or governmental organization. And what do we say, Ryan?
Suck it, Poindexters.
Suck it, Poindexters. Were you going to say something, Ryan, before I read Carolyn's bio?
No, if you want to know the background, listen to the show, Flaccid Eunuchs and Supersonic Helicopters. We just explained the whole Poindexter background there.
It's amazing.
Thank you, young MC.
Great name. Carolyn Rocco is a prior enlisted Air Force Lieutenant Colonel who graduated Reserve Officer Training Corps as a distinguished graduate in 2007. She is a two-time Air Force Office of Special Investigations Detachment Commander and was an Air Force ROTC instructor in the Pacific Northwest when the DoD vaccine mandate was implemented on August 24, 2021. Her permanent change of station schedule was delayed a year because she was not vaccinated. She was denied 2 medical exemptions, one for having COVID antibodies from natural infection, and the other for no medical supply of the FDA-approved vaccine,
Comirnaty.
Thank you. Comirnaty. She subsequently submitted a religious accommodation request, which was also denied at both the Major Command and Surgeon General level. In August 2022, Ohio Judge McFarland issued a preliminary injunction for the class of 9700 Air and Space Force members, who were also denied their religious accommodation requests, ultimately protecting Carolyn from being removed from service. Carolyn is still active duty working unnamed projects within the DC area. Welcome, Carolyn, to the show. It is so great to have you here.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you. And it's nice to see you face to face. And Ryan, it's always a joy to be reunited with a good friend.
Well, thank you. And thanks to you. If you see me and hear me looking and feeling very relaxed, it's thanks to you and those outstanding essential oils I'm diffusing right now. So thank you.
Oh, my.
That actually gives us a good headway into a little bit about about me. I'm kind of a hippie at heart.
So tell us a little bit more about yourself, Carolyn.
So I won't repeat the bio you just shared, but I've been in over 21 years, and I would say the biggest life-changing event was the COVID-19 vaccine mandate that happened in 2021. And as Ryan just alluded to, my gifting of essential oils to him, I did grow up in a pretty holistic household. We went to the chiropractor, took vitamins, did any and everything the natural way as much as possible. Not saying that we don't believe in the medical system, but we do have faith that, our bodies were created to fight off colds and sniffles. And there are alternative measures and means to take care of ailments. And so that has kind of been my lifestyle ever since I was a little kid. And so again, yeah, when the mandate came about, hadn't even been on the market for a full year, and an order that everybody needs to get this shot or they suffer consequences, it shook me up in a way that I had not experienced in my previous, at that time, about 18 years of service. So anyway, so the mandate came out in 2021, and I did try to get medical exemptions. I did have COVID naturally. I had the antibodies. I've actually gotten waivers for other vaccines because I've shown positive what they call titers in your blood. If your body still has those antibodies, the military will accept an exemption. And so I thought, okay, well, COVID should be no different. However, I quickly learned that COVID was very different in all capacities. So once that first medical exemption request was denied, I then submitted another one saying, okay, so we have Secretary of Defense Austin, as well as the subordinate service secretaries, in their memorandums, in their orders to the force, it specifically distinguished between FDA approved, meaning authorized, labeled, fully FDA approved. And that was what the order was. You will get an FDA authorized, approved vaccine. And they even went so far to say, or if you want to take an EUA, an emergency use authorized vaccine, we will count that as you fulfilling this mandate. So even in their verbiage, they distinguished between FDA approved and EUA products. And that was the fight we went on of like, okay, the only FDA approved named labeled product is Comirnaty, or was at that time. So when me and many thousands of my closest friends would call up the clinics or local pharmacies and ask, hey, I've got to fulfill this order. I just want to make sure you have Comirnaty. And they would usually respond with, yes, we have Pfizer. And I'm like, no, it's not just Pfizer. It has to be Comirnaty. And we have Pfizer BioNTech. Okay, you're not hearing what I'm saying. It has to be Comirnaty because that is the only FDA approved COVID-19 vaccine. And that is really the fight that we initiated in August of 2021, that there was no FDA approved vaccine. So how can service members fulfill an order if the product doesn't even exist?
And if we could back up just a little bit. So you were, when this mandate came out, I think I read you were detachment commander at ROTC, or what?
No,
what were you doing exactly
I
when
was
the
a
mandate?
professor.
So you were
Yeah,
a professor. Okay.
Yep. So not the commander. I was a major at the time. I was an assistant professor.
So just kind of walk us through the process a little bit. So you were a professor. This mandate came down from the command, I'm assuming, and you stood up and you said, well, no, these are the different exemptions that I've been able to place before. So you went to your local clinic, or just kind of walk us through just a little bit of the minutia, and then we can get to the larger fight so people kind of have context of why we're talking about, hey, you told us that you have an administrative system in place to have an exemption to this, but in reality, you actually didn't. So kind of walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah. So as you said, I was a ROTC instructor at a university up in the Pacific Northwest in the Washington, Idaho area. I'll just say Washington State University and University of Idaho. I actually worked at both. They were only separated by about 7 or 8 miles. And the university also had different rules in place. So that was another fight, and we won't talk about that specifically on this interview. But our ROTC detachments are not very big. So it was me, 3 or 4 other professors, and then our commander. So a small unit, 7 with our admin staff, maybe 8 people total. The nearest Air Force installation was also about an hour and a half away. So a lot of our medical care was on the local community in that part of Washington and Idaho. So when the mandate came out, it's a military mandate, and a lot of the civilians in the local community didn't understand necessarily what this entailed. And so I worked primarily with the clinic up at Fairchild. So I remember calling up to the medical clinic and speaking to a captain and saying, hey, what is the process for submitting a medical exemption? Like, you can look at my record, you will see I have, I'm exempt from the hepatitis vaccines and several others because I've gotten tested, blood tested, had titers, and even your instruction, I forgot the number off the top of my head, but there's an Air Force instruction that talks about serological tests. And if you have positive titers, then more than likely you submit an exemption. And I've never in my Air Force career have ever been denied those medical exemption requests.
And I'm going to interrupt you real quick, just for our listeners who might not know, an Air Force instruction is equivalent to a policy or regulation. I didn't know that when I first started working with Air Force. I heard instruction. I just thought that was just a memo.
Oh.
So that's why I wanted to make that clear for everyone.
Good clarification. Yeah. So the Air Force policy regulation allows for these types of medical exemptions. There's even a chart that shows this is the code you would put in the system for people who have positive titers, have the antibodies still within their body. And so I submitted that to the proper channels up at Fairchild, and it came back denied. Why? Because COVID was the exception to everything. All of a sudden, natural immunity didn't mean anything. For whatever reason, one of the excuses, well, we don't know how long natural immunity is going to keep you protected. Okay, my response was, okay, well then just give me an exemption for 6 months. I'll get another titer in 6 months. And if I still have, the antibodies, then I'll submit another exemption. Like, this isn't that difficult.
And where did the denial come from? Was it from the medical commander?
Yes. Or I wouldn't say, because you know how the medical clinic has different subunits within. And so working through my primary care manager, he had routed it up, I think, to his lieutenant colonel. And then it was, denied. So I'm like, okay, I'm absolutely not surprised. So then I submitted another one. Now, in my mind too, I'm at the point where, first of all, I was very surprised that a mandate even happened because, again, growing up in a more holistic household and upbringing and lifestyle, I knew that for any product to be fully FDA approved, it's going to take some time. Like, you can't just bring it to the market and say it's automatically approved. And so I was actually quite disappointed and quite surprised that this mandate actually was upon us.
And just for our audience members who might not be as intimately involved in this idea of a mandate. So COVID itself became an international thing in about March of 2020?
Yep. I just returned from Afghanistan.
Yep. March-ish of 2020. It became an international event that brought a lot of concern from the government, a lot of concern from people. Yep. And so then about a year and a half later, the federal government came out with a policy, another term for mandate, came out with a policy that said, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm paraphrasing this slightly, came out with a policy that said all federal workers, which includes uniformed service members, must take the COVID vaccine or face some sort of action. And within the military, that action was you had an option to submit for an exemption, which is kind of what we're walking through here with Carolyn, or you risked being separated from the service. And it did not matter how long you had been in the service, you risked being separated from the military. And that was, there are different rules for perhaps other federal workers, but we at least know that for the military. Now that was the mandate itself that came out. And Caroline, if you could, because I know you're certainly more of an expert on this than I am. If you were to play devil's advocate even to yourself, what was the trigger for that mandate coming into existence? And not separating a little bit from the political aspect, perhaps. And was there a belief within the federal government that we could not medically handle this anymore? What did they say? There was a readiness concern. What was the why behind it?
That's a great question. And I would really like an answer to that question. I can definitely speculate, and poor Ryan has heard some of my tinfoil hat theories. I mean, it's a really good way to control a population by saying you do this or, you get fired, you do this, or you get demoted, you do this, and so, a year and a half after COVID came into light, into our country specifically, most people had already had COVID. I do believe that there was and is still an ongoing narrative war that's happening, an information war. And I also listened to your interview with Captain York. And so I know when COVID first happened, like there were a lot of unknowns at the time. There were a lot of people trying to do the right thing. But at least for me in 2020, it seemed like every 2 or 3 weeks, they were just pushing the goalposts farther and farther, right? 2 weeks to stop the spread. Nope. 2 months. Nope. Now it's going to be 6 months. Now we're going to shut down schools. Now we're going to close everybody who is no longer considered quote unquote essential, but we'll keep open the big chain stores. And so I don't want to divert too far, but in my mind, at least so really what made me start thinking like, this just doesn't feel right at all was even before the mandate, when the whole toilet paper fiasco. I don't know if you guys remember in 2020 when like
Can't forget that.
Folks were losing their minds. And I'm like, help me understand what type of virus this is. Are you, shitting your pants, or is it like sniffles? And maybe it was for some. But so for me, just seeing how quick the world changed. And again, going back a little bit to that holistic upbringing where I know the sun provides vitamin D, and vitamin D is necessary to have a strong immune system. So when you see states, some of the most sunniest states, shutting down beaches, closing your playgrounds, telling you don't leave your house, especially without a mask. So you sit inside your air, not airless, but if you're not opening windows, if you're scared to do anything that was considered normal before COVID hit, and you sit in the corner and you just watch the TV and they're telling you, all of these things to be fearful of, which also diminishes your immune response. It's like we should have been doing the total opposite. And so all of these were like huge signs to me, like this is, guys, there's something really shady going on here. And so, and again, that on top of my understanding that you can't, like FDA takes years to officially, provide an approved product. And then all of a sudden we had something within a year. And now we're being told, hey, your 18-year career, you can go ahead and apply to separate or basically face the consequences if you don't apply to separate. And I do want to clarify, because I know you mentioned that service members had a couple options when the mandate came down, and we are dealing even now with the involuntary separated folks, right? The 8,700 or so who were kicked out. What people don't understand though, is all of the ones who left service, the 90,000 plus, give or take, when you add up all of the numbers, they are considered quote unquote voluntary. Well, last time I checked, it's not voluntary when you are threatened with court martial, when you are threatened with an Article 15, when you are threatened with all of that. You can't go to training, you can't PCS, you can't do all of the things that normally would occur in a service member's professional career unless you took this vaccine. To me, that's not voluntary. So for their own, saving their own life and their own livelihood, many people then opted to separate. But I can tell you that was not, by definition, voluntary. So right. So getting back to the medical exemptions, and so saying, hey, you guys don't even have the FDA approved product, so therefore this order cannot be fulfilled. And I think the designator was like MS or something for like medical supply. I'm now asking for this. And they're like, well, you can actually, they're interchangeable. And this brings us to September 14th of 2021. So just about 3 weeks after the mandate. And at the time we had a DOD official in the health administration, and she penned a memo that basically said to the force, you can treat an FDA approved vaccine, backwards. You can treat an emergency use authorized, an EUA vaccine, as if it's FDA approved. Here's a little tidbit. No, you can't. Not only did she not have the authority to make that decision, per CDC's guidance, per FDA's what's called the Purple Book, the only way you can actually take two products and label them interchangeable is if both products have been on the market for at least 10 years each. And then there's this whole process to apply for that interchangeable status. So that's essentially what really got things moving, right? Because now all the commanders are like, well, the DoD says that one can replace the other, when in reality, she didn't have the authority to do that. And that has been kind of our main fight, to bring awareness, especially to the current folks that are sitting in the Pentagon. And I will say the Secretary Hegseth just a few months ago has come out and publicly stated that the COVID vaccine mandate was unlawfully implemented, right? So again, it was lawful as far as what was on paper, because Secretary Austin at the time distinguished between the EUA and FDA, but how it was implemented was 100% unlawful. And so now we're still in this fight of how do we reconcile those who have lost careers and lost money with all the lawsuits, who have lost so much morale and trust, spiritually injured, physically injured. So many folks who then were placed in that situation. You roll up to your sleeve, you get it. You apply for separation, or you face the consequences. Well, many succumbed. They rolled up their sleeve. They got it. And unfortunately, we're also seeing a surprise, increased percentage of ailments such as cancer and myocarditis and stroke and fertility issues. So after my 2 medical exemptions were denied, and again, at 18 years in, I'm like, okay, next step is I'm going to submit a religious accommodation request. Now, I am a Christian, and I don't back away from that. I, at the time, didn't think having to prove my religious faith was constitutional to avoid getting an injection that I didn't want and they didn't have to begin with. So that's why it wasn't my default from the get-go. But to kind of buy time and hopefully maybe see some resolve in the court cases, I'm like, okay, well, let me submit a religious accommodation. So I did that in 2021, near the fall, early winter of 2021, sent it up to our major command, general. I knew, just because by this point too, the connections with other folks across the country and even across the globe, but primarily within the US, had grown. And so I was getting feedback from others who had submitted religious accommodations, and everybody was like, it's denied. So the Air Force specifically, if your religious accommodation request is denied by the MAJCOM commander, you can appeal it up to the Air Force Surgeon General, which is what I did. So it came back denied. I typed up my appeal, submitted that up to the Surgeon General, expecting that to be denied as well. And it was. But in between this time, I remember once my original religious accommodation request was denied, in order for me to appeal appropriately and thoroughly, it would have been great to know what information and data was submitted in what my chain of command at the time submitted to the MAJCOM commander. Like, what were the facts that caused this MAJCOM commander to deny my request? Because it wasn't just a memo from me. It got routed. Medical was involved, chaplain was involved, public affairs was involved, my entire chain of command was involved. Like, this was a process. And so I had asked my ROTC detachment commander at the time, like, hey, sir, I would really like to see the inputs that you provided to the chain of command so I can appeal appropriately. And he's like, yeah, sorry, I can't tell you that. You're going to have to FOIA it. Great. So in my appeal, I said, hey, please note that once I get my FOIA request back, I might be adding to this. But for right now, this is what I'm submitting. And of course, this is actually a document I shared with Ryan when we first connected a couple years ago. My FOIA request came back, and it was literally nothing but full 8.5 by 11 black pages. That was it. So I'm like, oh, this is how we're going to behave. This is how transparent we're going to be. This is how we're going to take care of our service members. And so again, being in the ROTC detachment, where I was teaching curriculum that talked about being an effective follower, not being a yes man, right? When you see something, you say something. Teaching classes on the Constitution, teaching classes on how we take care of our people and what proper communication and feedback looks like. And all of the things that I was teaching to these young cadets at the time was void as I dealt with my own issue. So again, the appeal came back denied, and I do believe in divine appointment. And it just so happens once I got my second order, this was the summer of 2022. So after my appeal comes back denied, my commander says, hey, we're back here again. Roll up your sleeve, get the shot, apply for separation or face the consequences. I said, okay, I have 5 days to give you a decision. And within that 5-day window is when Judge McFarland out of Ohio granted an injunction for the 9,700 Air and Space Force members had submitted religious accommodations, and all of ours were denied. So he didn't just protect the class or the group of 200 folks in this lawsuit. He went ahead and said, all right, Air Force, you guys need to slow your roll. So stop kicking people out. Stop giving folks letters of reprimand. This stops now. And so that injunction is literally the only reason why I am still able to wear the uniform today.
Oh man, so much to cover. Ryan Swayze, co-host. Hi, everybody. Where to begin? First of all, to everyone listening who's still listening, so one of our, I think, in fact, our most popular episode on the show is the Captain York episode, in fact. And it's because this COVID issue was and remains so divisive. So for everyone still listening who's like, it was legal, I was a commander, I was just doing my job, etc., I would just ask you, breathe through your nose and listen to the rest of the show, because there is a point, and it goes far beyond Novax, COVAX, etc. But by far, that Captain York episode, which is a great episode, and he's a hilarious guest too, and it was just a comedy of errors, thanks to the U.S. Navy, and remains a very contentious one, but also a very popular one because it's so emotionally charged. I'd like to make a lot of parallels that you highlighted in that story, Carolyn, and thanks for telling your story, by the way. And it has everything to do with what we do at the foundation every day. And we admittedly have, I believe, 0 COVID and COVAX related cases in our 3.5 years. There are a lot of people doing good work to unfuck that debacle, which is the mandate, legal or otherwise. So we don't delve into that. But the things we do get involved in parallel one for one what you and those 9,700 people went through, which is you saw what you believed was a wrongdoing, or you were a victim of it. You went and you followed the processes which are outlined by law to afford you redress. They were corrupted. They failed. Your appeals went to the same judge, jury, executioner, which was the same entity that was just rubber stamp denying. As an aside, I'm going to get off a tangent a little bit there. Carolyn, you showed me the memo from the Department of Defense IG that says these accommodation requests are not being given due diligence. And that went right into Secretary Austin's paper shredder. But it's from the horse's mouth that these processes that are outlined by law, right, just failed the member unequivocally. And it was because that one entity who was saying this mandate is legal was also the one who is the appellate authority. It's the same shit we see every effing day, right?
Right. And
it wasn't until you're able to exit that star chamber and get a court injunction where things actually started to happen. And the reason I'm so, I don't know, not emotional, I don't get really emotional, but the closest thing to emotional I get is the only way this works, the only way that service members nowadays get real redress, get real restitution, is if they're able to exit the sphere of control of the DoD. Because currently, and I'm going to play a little devil's advocate in a second here about the Hegseth stance on it, but the only way we see success with our clients in the cases is to go to Congress, is to go to the press, to get exposure, et cetera. You've got to exit the sphere of control, which is pretty broad, and they have quite a tight grip on what the truth is and what legal is. You can't see it, but I'm air quoting both of those because they are the final say for everything. Now, along with that, Secretary Hegseth has said the execution of the mandate was illegal, right? And okay, I'm going to be a little contrarian here. His predecessor said it was legal. Now he says it's legal. It's one and the same, because I argue, and here's where we differ, and you and I have had many discussions at length. We don't agree on everything, and that's okay. But healthy discourse is what this nation was built on, right? Is that it's one and the same thing. It's just one branch of the government unilaterally saying it's legal or it's not. And that's something I don't agree with, because I'm trying to get away from, and we at the foundation are attacking this as a singular entity operating A, with impunity, and B, without checks and balances from other branches. And that's why we see so many service members not receive justice, restitution, redress, because of that very phenomenon. What say you?
So I will kindly disagree that they are one of the same. And the reason I feel comfortable in disagreeing with you is when Secretary Hegseth came out and said the mandate was implemented unlawfully, he was given the actual federal statute. So you even mentioned anthrax, right, which happened 20 plus years ago. The whole shit show that came from the anthrax mandate is what forced Congress to create 10 U.S. Code 1107 Alpha. And if anybody reads it, because I feel like I keep talking about it and nobody's reading it, it's not difficult to understand. It's one or two sentences, but it says, hey, military, you cannot force inject an EUA product. You cannot force a military member to take an EUA product or to use an EUA product. And this is important because it's not just the vaccines. When you look at the masks and you just take a box of masks and look on the outside where the labeling is, and you will see emergency use authorized. Take a look at the tests. And this is where I greatly appreciate Captain York's, his story and his perspective. And I think at the time he was dealing with COVID, it was everything was just different than a year after his experience, where for those of us who chose not to get vaccinated, part of the punishment was, oh, now you have to succumb to a weekly test. Some people were having to test every other day. When then our argument just became stronger of like, well, guess what? The tests are EUA as well, emergency use authorized. So are we just now throwing out 10 U.S. Code 1107 that came to be because they saw how destructive the anthrax mandate was? To me, that is key. And so they are not one of the same. To say it's lawful in the last lawful in the last administration and now unlawful, and he did say unlawful, he said unlawfully implemented in this administration, is because the thousands of IG complaints, EO complaints, religious accommodation requests, Article 138. I'm not talking about 500. I am talking about potentially up to 100,000, maybe even more. We haven't even done an after action review on this. That's another surprising thing. Anytime there's such a disaster, we want to reflect and figure out, how do we ensure this doesn't happen again? So out of all of the documents that we submitted, all the informal and formal conversations that we have had with our commanders, for somebody to say, oh, but it was lawful, that was the moment where I'm like, okay, this is a critical juncture in how strong our military is going to be. Are we going to be filled of nothing but careerists and yes men who don't know how to read a simple statute? And I sometimes make an analogy, and you'll appreciate this, Ryan, because you're a pilot. I'm like, I'm not a pilot, right? So some of the argument was, well, you're not a lawyer, right? And you're not medical. So therefore you're a peon, you know nothing.
Right.
And I often compare it to, well, when I'm on an airplane, I'm not flying the airplane because I'm not skilled. I don't have that education, that expertise. But if I happen to look out the window and I see that there's an engine on fire, I really hope the pilot is not going to be like, but you're not a pilot, so do you really know what you're talking about? Anybody with common
it's
sense,
a non sequitur.
with eyes, right?
It's a non sequitur. So two things on that. One of the things you brought up was, let me back it up to some retorts we typically hear, which are, hey, the IG system is broken, we need legislation to blah, blah, blah. And I go, that legislation would just read, hey, DOD, the laws you're already not following, can you pretty please follow them now? Right? So what's the point of a law if when it's not followed, there is absolutely zero accountability, right? And that's a theme we see every effing day at the foundation. Freedom of Information Act, the Privacy Act. I mean, you could go on out. What's the point of all the law says? Okay, great. And so that brings me to point 1A, and I have a 1B floating about here. But 1A is, where the hell is the Congress? And I say that every day at the foundation, like, look, these laws are being violated. Title 10 is violated with impunity. Where is the check and balance? And it's absent.
Yep.
And you said it yourself with the Title 10, and we say it with 1034. Okay, so now, fast forward to the present. Everything's good. We all make up. Sorry about that, guys. Sorry for ruining your lives. How's the reinstatement going for these people?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah. Okay, Carol.
Stu Scheller, can you hear us now?
Yeah. I think it was Afghan evacuation lessons learned, because you mentioned lessons learned, right? That's also markedly absent thus far in 10 years, 10 months in the administration. But anywho, so this is what I think of. Like, okay, in our combined 60 years of service, how many PT tests, reform, and PT uniforms, physical training uniforms, hundreds, right? And it was always funny to me because it's like, we couldn't even get the simplest effing things done. We couldn't even get our arms. We talk about wars in the fifth dimension in China, pew, 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 and we couldn't even determine, like, well, do we use abdominal circumference or not? Right? It was just indicative of the simplest things we couldn't get our hands around. So I think about this reinstatement, right?
Yeah.
And it goes through, there's an axis of evil. And yes, I call it the axis of evil. One of the spokes of the axis of evil, aside from IG, FOIA, the third one is the Board of Correction of Military Records, right? That they are just as opaque and inept and glacial and corrupted as the other two spokes of that axis of evil. But it has to go through them, right? So you've got that aspect, but you've also got this thing, and this is why I draw the parallel to the PT uniform, is like, in the world's most powerful military, and with the commander-in-chief being the president, why can it not just be make it so and it effing happens? I don't understand. What's going on, Carolyn? Explain.
So and this is just my opinion, it is because we have been infiltrated by careerists, by people who actually don't know the mission, the true mission of the DOD, DOW, however you want to refer to it as. And they have been in the system for so long, the last thing they want to do is change that system. And so I know quite a few folks who are up at the Pentagon who literally are working 25 hours a day trying to fix this. But you know what? A handful of folks, or even 100 folks out of an organization of millions, if you don't have buy-in at every level below to actually enforce this, you might as well hang it up. And so people will give they will give a smile, they will give a wink, be like, oh, yes, sir, this is what we're going to do. And then they turn around and they have absolutely no desire and no plan to execute the plans and the executive orders that, President Trump and then obviously Secretary Hegseth have put into place. So how do we get rid of it? I mean, I have ideas. I don't think
so. It's not happening. So these people aren't being reinstated because there's basically secret mutiny. Is that? I mean, that's going on here?
But I can't even buy that though, Carolyn, because Secretary Hegseth's memo is the one that directed everyone to the BCMR.
Right.
I mean, he signed that memo.
Right.
So as much as we want to blame the palace eunuch,
it's everybody.
He signed the memo. He did not have to sign the memo.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying, though. It's everybody that is from all the way up top to the 4 stars to the people that are in processing folks, whoever created the process. First of all, and every service is a little bit different. I have a good friend of mine who's actually trying to get reinstated. She was a 10-year Air Force captain. She got kicked out. She's going through the BCMR process. She's also pregnant. right? So she's trying to get back pay reinstated, all of that. Her directions for the BCMR to even consider her case, she had to go to MEPS, a MEPS station 2 hours away.
What's MEPS?
MEPS is the military entrance processing station or something like that. It's where
it's for enlisted.
For enlisted. It's where recruits go. Yeah. It's where new recruits off the street go. Yeah. And I remember doing this in Oregon in 2000, end of 2000 when I first enlisted. And it's hell because you're sitting there with everybody else. You can't move. It's like basic training. Everything's organized there. People are telling you can do this, you can't do this. It's a long day with a bunch of young folks who are looking for a better life, if you will.
Yeah.
So now they're telling people who have 5 years, 10 years, 15 years in, hey, before we can even start this BCMR process, we've got to actually get you supposedly back in the system. So you're going to have to go to MEPS. Who made that decision? This is what
I'm the devil's advocate you on that one real quick. Cause I do watch Stu Scheller's posts on LinkedIn. Yeah. By watch, I mean read. And his response to that was, well, how else, if we're concerned about readiness as a force, how else are we going to make sure that these people that were either kicked out or voluntarily, quote unquote, big quotes on volunteer, voluntarily left 2 to 3 years ago, haven't gained 400 pounds,
sure,
are raging alcoholics and are missing all their teeth?
Yeah. Well, how do we do that?
So I think we do have to have some sort of process.
For sure.
And the decision that was made was MEPS.
Right. I would argue that at least for officers and for folks who have served, the answer should not be MEPS. They have a hard enough time with brand new recruits. Can your local primary care provider, are they not capable of literally looking at you to determine you haven't gained 400 pounds, you have all your teeth, and you're not, your body's not invaded with all of these diseases? They sure can.
So what happened with your friend? She went to MEPS and then
she went to MEPS. So she went to MEPS. She's pregnant, right? Like I said. And like I said, MEPS is pretty militant, because again, it's new kids off the street. She's asking, or had requested to keep water with her, but they're treating her like a brand new recruit. And so the answer was no. You can ask permission to go use the water fountain. And my friend is like, I'm fucking pregnant. I'm also been in the service for 10 years. I was an Air Force officer and I'm being treated and it's nothing against them. They have to do what they have to do in that environment, which is why MEPS should have been the very last place that the reinstated folks processed through. So there was an officer who was managing this MEPS center. He pulled her into his office and said, I will no longer, now I say hearsay, this is what she has reported, right? I was not there to say 100%, but he said, these outbursts need to stop. And she's like, what outburst? I'm asking to keep water with me. But because everybody else couldn't have a water bottle with them, she was not allowed to have a water bottle with her. And he then said, you know what? This is ended. It's terminated. So she left. So she drove 2 hours to spend 30 minutes to basically be told she can't have a water bottle with her as she's 5 or 6 months pregnant. She leaves. She makes a post online because, again, it seems like unless there's media attention, nobody's going to give a rat's ass about what's happening. And she got the attention of a senior secretary and things changed. And she's actually now getting seen at her local clinic because that's what makes sense, especially people who are coming back in. The military already has all of your records. They have them all. This isn't the same as somebody who you've never seen and you've never monitored before. So the process should be different.
So we're about 10-ish months by the time this airs, about 10 months into the administration. And, I'm going to get on my soapbox here. I look at the things that are done first are those that are priorities.
Sure.
Would you agree with that? So I look at it and we have some peripheral stuff that's been done, name changes and beard policies and stuff. And here we are and we've had a dozen or so people reinstated at that. I mean, it's minuscule, right?
Well, you also have to consider how many people have actually expressed interest in returning.
That was going to be my second question. Is
in all seriousness,
anybody want to come back to that?
Well, there's two things, and I understand and agree that you will action the highest priority, the highest priorities. But I also think there's value in, hey, what's the lowest fruit that we can just make an easy kill. It's a quick change, take care of that. I don't know if Secretary Hegseth knew how bad the rot is at the Pentagon to where people would do what we call malicious compliance of like, okay, yeah, no, we'll reinstate them, sure. And we'll go ahead in the meantime and devise this really detailed, super, long and idiotic process to bring people back. I mean, he's a freaking secretary. I don't think he was being read in on that level of detail. Just assumed perhaps that folks would actually carry out the orders of the day. And now what we're realizing is they haven't, and it's been nothing but a shit show. But in good news is because there has been social media attention on this, we were able to meet up at the Pentagon about 3 weeks ago. There likely will be a COVID task force with people who have been on the other side of this COVID fight and mandate and reinstatement, because we have the experience, we know the nuances to properly address them and fix them. And so I do have hope that things will get better, but you're right, we're 200 plus days into this and nothing's happened. Now, going back to, what victim is actually going to want to return to their abuser? Because nobody has been held accountable.
Right.
When folks, and I will give you just one more example. When I talked about my religious accommodation request, and then I asked for the documentation so I can appeal appropriately, and I got back nothing but black pages in my FOIA request. Well, I was also able to get my hands on the unredacted copy of all the information that went up to the MAGCOM commander. And I was pissed. And why was I pissed? Because I was reading information that a 3-star general signed to the MAGCOM commander about me personally. So this general is across the country. I'm in Podunk, Idaho, Washington. And all of a sudden he's giving details in his memo that he would only know if my detachment commander provided in this system. And they were lies. They were basically like, I've missed class, I had COVID. I tested positive for COVID after the vaccine mandate. And I'm like, you guys, this narrative, they will lie to ensure the narrative lives on and on and on. And nobody's there to fact check them because they're generals and everybody bows to generals. And I'm not saying this as an insubordinate. I'm just saying folks have lost their way and they've lost the core values, right?
Yeah.
And it's shameful.
Last blurb before I give the floor back to Francesca here. Yeah, I was reading over the summer a lot of hullabaloo about this permanent change of station, PCS, the moves from Transportation Command, and how the contract got all effed up, and people are, their lives are in limbo, and they can't move, or there's like the lowest bidder, so stuff's getting lost, stuff's getting broken and moved, and people's lives are being upended. And it wasn't until a very prominent spouse took it online to the media, to social media, and it got exposure, aka embarrassment, before there was motion and movement on it. And I think immediately about all the 1 stars, 2 stars, 3 stars from her to the secretary, because the headline was secretary, enables change in the move system or whatever it was. But how many flag officers between her and the secretary knew it was an issue, would stand up on a stage in a second and go, people are our most valuable resource, blah, 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 and then do jack squat about this blaring problem that was people and their families' lives are upended because the move system is all effed up. And I think about what you just said about how it's like the problem is glaring, but yet we don't have, and this is just Ryan Swayze talking, we lack such moral courage in our general officer, flag officer corps. They are so averse to making bold decisions because you're rewarded for towing the line, you're rewarded for not being embarrassed, you're rewarded for being a sycophant. And the only people that pay the price are the honorably serving men, women, and families of this nation. With that, I close.
Bravo. I agree.
Bravo, Ryan. Well, a kind of really good segue actually on question that I had. Two questions. First one is, so this whole, just the application for the exemptions for the 2 different major exemptions, first for medical, then for religious. Just if I'm recalling your timeline a little bit, that took about a year to come back and the appeals being denied and whatnot, right?
Correct.
So just in that year alone, can you give us a snapshot of what was happening at work? How were you being treated? And how did you feel?
Well, out of a small unit, I had a colleague who was also going through this with me. So we did have each other for support. I actually had my coworkers were not horrible. I'll say that. So, I've heard stories of folks who weren't able to use gyms, who, weren't allowed to name your activity, and they weren't allowed to do that because they weren't vaccinated. I think just as I've been pretty direct in this interview, and this is just how I am with everybody I come into contact with, I'm kind of a no nonsense. Like I know what the rules are. I'm not going to bow down, especially if it's something that I can see is harming the force. And I think my commander at the time also sensed that. He was brand new. It's kind of funny. I worked for two ROTC detachment commanders. And when the new one came in, it was like 2 weeks later, he's now giving me an order. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. So it's like, oh, nice to meet you. We're not going to play this game. And so I will say he didn't push too hard, because I think he knew that I had avenues and it wasn't going to be good for him. So he kind of let me, I don't want to say let me get away with things. I wasn't trying to get away with things. I will say though, because it was only a 2-year assignment, I was held over for a 3rd year because I was not vaccinated, as was my coworker. But both of our replacements came in. So now we're like 2 extra staff. We didn't have the room for it. So 2 things happened. One, my colleague and I no longer were instructors in the classroom. We did still attend physical training and leadership lab, and we interacted with the cadets. We weren't told we couldn't, but we weren't in the classroom. We got stuck with the additional duties, like all of the things that most folks dread doing. In addition to that, there was also not enough space. So he converted the storage closet to his office. I converted the back corner of the conference room as my quote unquote office. And then we just did what we needed to do for that year. And that was 2022 to 2023. But I will tell you, I'm a pretty active person as well. And for the 2.5 years that I was dealing with this, literally every waking moment outside of work was spent on researching FDA, CDC, laws, printing articles, trying to connect with other folks dealing with, with this situation, also helping the cadets. So that's something this isn't just about me. We had about 10 cadets within the cadet wing of about 100 who also submitted religious accommodations. And that was something else, is ROTC does not require cadets to get a flu shot. They're not Title 10, they're cadets, right? When the COVID shot mandate came out, and ROTC headquarters decided that this was, or maybe it was Air Education Training Command, that everybody, to include these cadets who are not on Title 10, also needed vaccine to commission, to contract, so on and so forth. I had quite a few who said, I don't want to take it. And so I helped them with their religious accommodations. Word got out in the ROTC community that yeah, hey, instructors and other cadets, if you need some help or if you need to get connected, here's Carolyn Rocco's phone number and email. So it was literally like this parallel effort. Actually, I liken it to joint operations. Like, this is stuff we learn in our professional military education, how to connect with other services, with people that are not geographically stationed with you. And I'm telling you, that learning was used every day of my life as during that 2.5 year time frame, as far as the connections, also working with Congress, because it was in the 2023 NDA, the National Defense Authorization Act, is when they rescinded the mandate, the COVID-19 vaccine mandate. That wasn't because a bunch of congressmen have a good heart and saw it for what it was. It was because the ankle biters, such as myself and a team of us, were just nonstop persistent, engaging with any congressman who would listen to us. So yeah, it was. Now, I will also say I love the Pacific Northwest. So for me, it was kind of a blessing as well, because I lived on the Idaho side, and Idaho and Washington treated COVID so differently. The gym I went to remained open. The University of Idaho stayed open, whereas Washington State closed down. And so because I lived on the Idaho side and I had many friends, like civilian friends, neighbors and whatnot, that was my support system. It hurt my soul to say that my true patriotic colleagues and wingman, if you will, my battle buddies were all folks who never put on the uniform. That hurts to say. This is where that moral injury comes in, right? Because we are told from day one, courage, honor, teamwork, and it all got washed down the drain when this particular mandate was implemented.
It's and you're not alone, because literally every client we work with goes through the same isolation, because they know to stay, but you become radioactive, right? When you look at the institution cross-eyed, you are now nuclear, and they know that they're going to be collateral damage if they stay by your side. And I'm not excusing their cowardice, but they make a rational decision because they know to go in this fight is a losing proposition for them as well, and they don't want to cost their career, future career, what have you. And it is sad, isn't it? Because we tout these values of courage and we personify them on the battlefield most times, but then when it comes to the element of moral courage, like stand by your side and be that ally, they scatter. But it has more to do, I think, with the reward system of the military than anything else. What's incentivized and what's punished, right? And then the other thing we tell clients is exactly what you said, was like, look, if you have been targeted by the military institution, the only way you win is by persisting, and the only allies you're going to have are yourself. And now, shameless plug, Walk the Talk Foundation. But I say that not in jest, because that's exactly why we established the organization. Because as you well know, if you are going in this administrative kangaroo court, you don't get counsel, you don't get representation, you don't get trained, nobody tells you what the laws are, nobody tells you what to do, there is no one to help you, while your friends, wingman, battle buddy, are being isolated or are isolating you. You are at this alone for years, right? Because that's what it takes. It is a campaign, as our advisor Cinco de Mayo says. It is a campaign, but in order to win, and this is the message for everybody, in order to win and come out victorious, if victory over stupidity is a victory, I don't know. I asked myself that, but in order to surmount the obstacles, it takes a toll, right? It's not only in terms of your psychological and emotional well-being, but also just from a time and resource, it is a slog. And if you're not bought in and you're not willing to accept risks, you're not going to come out victorious.
Yep. Well said.
100%. So I when you were talking a second ago, I was like, crap, you made me think of another question. So I have.
She's a fascinating guest.
Yes.
keep spearing her with questions.
So this question is actually for our Poindexters of the group. So I'm going to play.
Of which there are many.
I'm going to play devil's advocate again. So in my recollection of having read the Bible, nowhere do I read anything about vaccines. So how is not taking a vaccine appropriate as a religious accommodation request? Because I've heard that argument over and over, regardless of the religion. There's no religion that says you will never take vaccines that I'm aware of.
So by the absence of phrasing doesn't mean that vaccines wouldn't be a consideration. It does. The Bible talks about how you are well and perfectly made, how your body is to be a temple. So if you are already, and I will tell you, in addition to the toilet paper fiasco, I also had quite a few friends, both civilian and military, who took the vaccine before the mandate came out and suffered specifically menstrual issues. To me, that was a red flag. So, and it's similar to why I'm not a big drinker. I actually don't drink coffee, and I'm not perfect. I'm not expecting people to behave perfectly, but there is value, and you've got to understand other verses of the Bible. I will also mention that the Air Force instruction, the Air Force regulation, as it talks about religious accommodations, it doesn't say you have to prescribe to Christianity or to Judaism. Even if you have a conflict of conscience, you can submit a religious accommodation. And again, these documents are out there. I just don't know how many people actually read them. Now, granted, I think most folks who submitted religious accommodation were of the Christian denomination, but that definitely doesn't mean that even atheists could apply for a religious accommodation. If it didn't sit right, that is enough to say, listen, this is going against whatever you want to call it. And there's a process to process those requests through, which did not happen in the time or fashion that they were detailed should have happened in that Air Force instruction.
And correct me if I'm wrong, the last data point I heard was every single religious accommodation request that was submitted was denied.
Okay. So let's caveat that. They would have such a black eye if they denied 100% of the religious accommodations. So what they did, so they could say, well, we didn't deny 100%. Those who had applied for separation and or retirement, even before the mandate came out, crazy enough, those exemptions were approved.
Oh,
because they knew they were leaving.
Because
they were leaving the service anyway.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead, give a good name for ourselves, say that we approved some, but anybody who intended to stay in the military denied. And more importantly, it came out in one of the court cases, there is reason to believe at Corona. So Corona is when all the Air Force leaders get together. It's not, I mean, it is the name of the virus, crazy enough. But even before that, it's an event where all the top leaders of the Air Force come together, usually once a year. So Corona happened, I want to say in October 2021 timeframe. There's a court ruling that came out, and don't quote me on the exact verbiage, but basically at the time, the Secretary of the Air Force, Frank Kendall, told all of his MAGCOM commanders they will not approve any religious accommodations. I think
that's unlawful command influence.
Yeah, that's right.
I think there's a law about that.
Yeah.
Law schmaw.
Yeah, law schmaw, policy, schmolicy. Like, we don't really care. And this goes right into because I have to give a quick shout out to Sam Shoemate, who used to go by Terminal CWO. He is the one that brought to my attention this idea of shadow policy. So you have in writing, black and white, what policy is, what policy should be followed by those who actually are upholding their oath, right? I will well and faithfully discharge the duties. And that includes following these guidelines and the laws. And then what we have is that we're all suffering under to some extent is this shadow policy, the policy that is actually being employed on all of us. And usually they are 180 degrees different.
The star chamber.
Yeah,
the star chamber.
Yes.
Plug, show plug.
Star chamber.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So actually with Sam.
Yeah.
That my final question related exactly to that, not Sam specifically.
Yeah.
But I was just a couple days yesterday. I don't even know what day it is. I'm almost like you, Ryan. I'm like, I don't know what day it is.
Awesome. Yeah, welcome.
This is terrible.
Who am I?
This is terrible.
It's September, I think.
I'm not made for this travel thing. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So I was just at Military Influencer Conference.
Bless your soul.
Bless my heart. Bless your heart. Oh, in Atlanta, Georgia. And I was talking to someone, and they were talking about the COVID mafia. The COVID mafia. And they were saying it's a real thing. I mean, it's just this blob of people that just united around. They're so united, and they just push and push and push and push. And we see that. So how did that start?
Yeah.
And then who is the official or unofficial leader of it? Where are the talking points approved? How can we get that? How can we, the Walk the Talk Foundation, get on that media campaign? Not exactly that one, but the methodology. It's pretty powerful.
Tell you, it sounds crazy, but there's not a lot of people in it that are actively engaged on social media. I mean, the force is strong for sure. And this is what happens when you have 4 years now moving up, going on 5 years of people literally trying to save their lives and livelihoods. That is where our true wingmen are. And I think that's where we have such a strong and committed group of people, because at our lowest lows, it was them across the country, like, that we could depend on. So Rob Green is another example because we also plagiarized. I mean, admittedly so, certain parts of, of an appeal here, or, hey, I want to submit this in my Article 138. And you're like, oh, I didn't think about that. And we would share information, and we all came together through, 2020 into 2021 when the mandate first happened. But a lot of folks saw the writing on the wall even before the mandate. And so they started kind of organizing. I was a little late to the game just because, again, I was in rural Idaho. But I think also what brought us all together, and in fact, this is a good story I think it's a good story. I'm sure there's going to be haters out there who think it's a horrible story. But prior enlisted Mark Bashaw, he was Air Force. He cross-serviced into the Army, was a lieutenant. Yeah, he was a public health officer. Don't quote me on that, but looked at insects and viruses and all of that. He was stationed at Aberdeen Proving Ground. And when COVID happened, he did his duty and, researched all the information, was providing legitimate data up to his chain of command saying, listen, this is actually what's being reported, which is opposite what is going on in the news right now. Or going back to that information war that we're in. Long story short, he refused to mask and test. He's like, these are EUA products. I am not wearing a face covering while I'm working out. You guys are insane. And I'm also not shoving ethyl oxide shit up my nose. I'm not doing it because there's no need, because that's another thing. And I know Captain York referenced the testing, but like when your orange juice and when your cat piss test positive for COVID, not together, but they're just not accurate medical devices. And that's what also set the narrative. Oh, we had this many tests and this many came back positive. Well, there's no way that this story is going to end anytime soon if folks are solely dependent on a COVID test. All that to say, he got court-martialed by none other than, at the time, Lieutenant Colonel Yevgeny Vindman, who is now a Virginia representative, but court-martialed, found guilty, believe it or not, for not following an order. But the judge did not associate any penalty to that guilty charge, if you will, meaning he didn't owe the government money. He didn't owe the government any time. It was guilty, with a nice little note from the judge to the commanding officer. I encourage you to dismiss this case. Because once all the evidence was submitted, and there were a couple hiccups, all this to say is I flew out from Idaho to Maryland. I had no idea who Mark Bashaw was. I felt something in my soul. I didn't know how many people he was going to have in the courtroom to support him, but I'm like, he is getting court-martialed. You do a court-martial for sexual, assault subjects and folks who, no kidding, do some serious crime. And now we have an upstanding service member who is 17 years in. He's getting court-martialed, found guilty for not testing or masking. So the good news story is President Trump pardoned him in May. And just last week, as he went through the Army BCMR equivalent process, he just found out he is full relief and full reinstatement. So he might be coming back in sooner than later. But going back to your original question is, how is this mafia, how's this COVID team so strong? It's because we show up for each other. I had no idea, and I'm not saying just me, everybody shows up for each other. We will drive across the country because those who worked in the cubicle next to us ignored us. And that is why our bond is so strong. And that's also why we are now getting a seat at the table. I mentioned just 3 weeks ago, there were 15 of us around a table at the Pentagon talking to the Secretary of War. And there were another 15 or 20 on a Zoom call so that they can hear how this reinstatement process is messed up and how we have ways to fix it, to not just improve the DoD, but to hopefully start making whole the tens of thousands of service members who have been broken from this particular mandate.
Well, that is I think that's a good point for us to start our wrap up. Carolyn, it has been so lovely to have you on the show. I have learned a tremendous amount, and especially fun and lively conversation. I appreciate you putting up with all of our devil's advocate. We're trying to get ahead of some of the questions, a lot of the questions I know some of our audience members will ask. And thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. And then I'll turn it over to Ryan for his final thoughts, and then I'll leave the floor to you at the very end, Carolyn, for any closing thoughts.
All right. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Carolyn. This is 3+ years in the making to get you on the show here, and it's well worth the wait. It's, you and I go back, I think all the way to, I think you had reached out as I was retiring, and my story went national, and I had no idea at that point that we would be working very much in parallel, maybe crisscrossing at times, but you and your mafia working your thing, and me and my small mafia of two working our thing here. But I've always appreciated your candor and insights and your advice, and we don't agree on everything all the time, and that's okay. But one of the fundamental things that this nation was founded on is healthy discourse, something that is sadly lacking nowadays. And hopefully, if nobody takes anything else away from this episode, it's that we can respectfully agree and respectfully disagree and tolerate each other, right? Which was one of the principal foundations of the country, right? So I appreciate that. I've always appreciated that about our relationship. But to mirror what Francesca said, I very much appreciate you coming on, telling the story, and allowing us to relate it to the work that we do, which is admittedly hardly ever, if ever, COVAX related. The work we do at the foundation and taking it down to the micro level, something that people go through still now every day. It might not have to do with a vaccine,
right?
But it is same church, different pew every damn day. And my final thing to say, the plug, is the fact that we may have quasi-defeated the COVID vaccine, but the systems in place, the systemic issues, the root causes that caused anthrax, COVAX, all the same debacles, are still intact. Nothing about that has changed, and that's what we need to change. So thanks again, and that's all I've got.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you both for having me. It was an absolute honor to have this conversation, this dialogue back and forth. I will tell you, Francesca, that every opportunity I get, you and Ryan's name and Walk the Talk Foundation are always the first words out of my mouth whenever IG comes up, EO comes up. I fully support your mission for having a truly independent, not this quasi in name only independent inspector general
nice.
System. And so if there is anything, we will welcome you whenever, wherever. Yeah, my group is your group. And like I said, and I know everybody in my group knows who you are. Like I told them today, like, hey, I'm going to Walk the Talk. Is there anything that Walk the Talk Foundation, podcast, anything you want me to say? And they're like, oh my gosh, they're awesome. And no, just, say hi. And we love them. And anything that we can do to help you guys. I think right now it's just word of mouth, right? Making some connections to hopefully get some proposals through Congress, if that's still a possibility. But I always say this, we did not get into this mess overnight. We are not going to get out of it overnight. Yeah. But there are many who have realized their calling to this earth. I feel like when the COVID mandate, faced me, I can honestly say the 18 years leading up to that was the warm up for the last 4 to 5 years. And I have a very different perspective on how things need to go moving forward if we're going to save not only the military, but the country. And so, again, the honor was mine. So thank you so much for having me and letting me ramble for a while. So, and if there are any people who have specific questions, I agree with Ryan. We need to have a healthy dialogue. I'm also an investigator by trade. And so I'm a fact-based. I don't usually go on emotion, although we are human beings and we do. That's just part of our makeup. But if you can't show me the facts to support your argument, I'm probably going to move on. So that's all I got.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. And we will see everyone for the next episode.
Bye.
Bye. Well, that's it for this week's topic. We really appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and check out our foundation website at walkthetalkfoundation.org.
And feel free to reach out and give us feedback. You can get a hold of us via Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and our foundation's website. Details in the description section. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next episode.